So, what if I told you that the people who really change the world, well, they aren't these super confident, always on time geniuses who have a perfect plan from day one? It turns out the psychology behind them is, well, the complete opposite. Let's dig into the 5 really counterintuitive habits of true originals.
We have to start with this quote from Thomas Edison, right? Because it just perfectly captures the whole spirit of an original thinker. It's not about nailing it on the first try. Nope. It's all about this relentless process of discovery, which, from the outside often looks a whole lot like failure.
We've all been told this story, this myth, that the people who truly change things, the Steve Jobs or the Martin Luther Kings of the world, were just born different. That they never doubt themselves, they always hit their deadlines. But the research? It shows that originals, the people who actually go out and challenge the status quo, are often riddled with doubt. They're masters of delay, and honestly, their first ideas are usually pretty terrible.
And that brings us to our very first surprising habit, procrastination. Yeah, you heard me right. We're always taught to see it as this terrible vice, but for original thinkers, it's actually a super powerful creative tool.
And what's really fascinating is that there's actual data on this. The organizational psychologist Adam Grant, he found that moderate procrastinators are actually 16% more creative than people who just dive in and finish a task right away. See, it's not about being lazy, it's about being strategic with your delay.
So how in the world does this work? Well, it's all because of something called the incubation period. When you put a task on hold, your brain doesn't just switch off. Your subconscious keeps turning it over, connecting all these different random ideas and looking at the problem from all these new angles. Originals don't rush. They let their ideas kind of marinate.
I mean, just think about the Mona Lisa. Da Vinci didn't just paint that in a week. It took him years. He would just leave the painting for these long stretches to go study things like optics and human anatomy. Now, people probably thought he was just wasting time, but it was that exact knowledge of light and shadow that he gained during those delays that made the painting the masterpiece it is.
Okay, let's move on to our second habit, and you'll see how this really builds on the first one. It's all about the art of doubting. But there's this one crucial distinction that originals make that just changes everything.
And here it is the crucial difference. There are 2 kinds of doubt. You've got self-doubt, which says, ugh, I'm not good enough for this. But then there's idea doubt, and that says, this idea isn't good enough, yet I just need to find a better version. Original thinkers are absolute masters at turning that crippling self-doubt into productive idea doubt. They totally embrace this idea that the first attempt is almost never the best one. They might even feel like imposters, right? But they use that feeling as a shield, as fuel to test and refine and iterate over and over. They don't think, I'm bad. They think, of course the first 10 drafts are supposed to be bad. I just got to get to the 11th.
And this leads us right into the third habit, which is all about perspective. It's about how originals manage to find these game-changing ideas in the most ordinary places you can imagine. So, we all know déjà vu, that spooky feeling that you've seen something before. Well, originals practice something called vuja de, and it's the total opposite. It's when you look at something you've seen 1,000 times, like a boring coffee mug or a long line at the store, and you suddenly see it with completely fresh eyes. And they do this by asking one really simple but incredibly powerful question about, well, everything. Why does it have to be this way? They just don't accept the world as it is. They question all the defaults. And that's where innovation is born. Not from accepting what is, but from imagining what could be. All right, our fourth habit. This one completely shatters that myth of the lone genius who just sits around and creates one single perfect masterpiece. The truth is, a whole lot more productive.
Let's go back to Edison for a second. The guy held over 1,000 patents. We remember him for the light bulb, the phonograph, but the vast majority of his inventions? Total failures, or just plain obscure.
Or how about Picasso? He created more than 30,000 artworks in his lifetime. That's thousands of paintings, sculptures, drawings, but really, only a small fraction of those are what we'd call world-class masterpieces. So what does this all tell us? It shows that originals know creativity is basically a numbers game. It's a probability game. They get that the only way to get to real quality is through a whole lot of quantity. They don't just sit around waiting for perfection to strike. They produce, and they produce a lot, because they know the more shots they take, the better their chances of hitting a masterpiece.
And finally, our last habit. In this one might be the most surprising of them all. It pretty much goes against one of the most common pieces of business advice you will ever hear.
We are always told about the first mover advantage, but the data, it shows the exact opposite. The pioneers, the very first people into a market, have a failure rate of a whopping 47%. But the fast followers, the ones who come in later, learn from the pioneers' mistakes, and then build something even better, their failure rate is just 8%. Think about it. Google wasn't the first search engine, and Facebook was definitely not the first social network. They were settlers, not pioneers.
So let's bring all this back to you. Do any of these so-called flaws sound a little familiar? If you tend to delay your work, if you doubt your ideas, if you're constantly asking why, and if you keep trying even after you fail, then, hey, congratulations. You might just be on the path to becoming an original yourself. Because when it comes down to it, that's the most important thing to take away from all this. Originality isn't some magical gift that's only handed out to a chosen few. It's a choice. It's a choice to reject the defaults, to embrace all that uncertainty, and to see the world not just as it is, but as it could be.
So, I'll leave you with this question to chew on. Just look at your work, your habits, your daily life. What is one default setting that you've always just accepted that you are going to choose to question starting today?